1.
Hello, everyone. It's Curt, Francis, and Martin from the Natural Law Institute. This is our office hours session where we answer questions that you've submitted to us. Today's Friday, September 3rd. Is it really Friday the 13th?
Yep.
Yay! So we got a today is uh, celebrate the the Templars Day. This is the day of Templars execution. The treason against the Templars Day.
It's
Um,
it was it the day that we murdered the good bankers and
yes,
ushered in bad
exactly.
bankers?
And we made room for the bad bankers. Exactly what happened. In any event, so we have usually the way it works is we have a list of questions you've submitted. There's a form. Francis puts the URL for that form in the notes below the videos. You submit your questions on that form. Um, I don't know who collects it. I guess it's Martin now. Which one of you collects that? I'll forget by the next meeting.
Whichever one of us gets to it first. Usually Martin.
Right, and then we put it in the and I guess we don't really have to filter them very much anymore, do we?
Nope.
No,
Not at all.
huh?
No.
Not at all.
Not at all. And so we put those questions in the document. Martin goes through and answers them, which of course Martin's always right. So, but I try to add color around it, my color around it, which was basically I say a lot of historical words and nonsense. So it turns out that people really like these things and they listen to them. So we have quite a bit of fun with it, and we're building quite a library of questions at this point, right?
Yep.
That at some point we've got to sucker a volunteer.
We actually do. We have. You were talking about the shorts?
Yes.
Yeah, so our intern will be working on those. In fact, we are coming up on, this is how many, 145 questions answered.
Wow, that's awesome. All right, so I think today I was all confused for some reason when I saw I went and looked for the document. I'm like, where is it? I couldn't find it, but Martin called me an idiot in his subtle way of not directly calling me an idiot because I was already looking at the correct page with the correct page, and he says you're actually looking at it. So anyway, I thought we'd answered some of these, but I was just confused. All right, so today's we're going to start off with it. Anything you guys want to contribute before we get started? No.
Oh, our fall convention in Oktoberfest is coming up in less than a month. What, 2, 3 weeks? So
Yeah,
we'll
so
be in
October.
Texas. If you have not, if you're interested in attending, have not signed up yet, please go to naturallawinstitute.org under events and come join us.
Thank you. Please. Um, I'm sitting. Martin's at home. Francis is at home. I'm in the office at Brandon's house. So apologize for having to pretty much look at me this way. Anyway, Francis, you want to start for the first question while I get rid of my
Yep.
hiccups?
All right, question 1 from Levi. I recently lost my beloved dog, which prompts me to ask, how do you view the role of Canis lupus familiaris in the development of human societies? How has the domestication of dogs shaped human culture evolution? And what does this reveal about the broader relationship between humans and other species throughout history? Additionally, I'd love to hear any interesting thoughts you might have about the evolution history of dogs throughout human civilization.
Martin, do you want to cover this? Or do you want me to just go into it?
Well, you seem
Okay.
to know about this.
All right. So the truth is, we know a lot about this subject. A surprising amount about it. Um, and it's a warm, fuzzy subject. In other words, people like to read about it. They like to do research on it um, because dogs really are quite wonderful, and um, it's it's hard. We treat them as a domesticated animal, but they're much more a part of us and our history than is obvious. Um, So I want to make sure I answer the actual question here. How has it shaped? Well, us. Well, first, they provide a valuable service, which is that they are not occupied by all the nonsense we have in our minds, and they are more occupied by scent and sound, and so they extend our sensory apparatus around us. Um, this turns out to be really, really useful. The second thing is that while we can run longer than they can, which if you've ever taken a dog on a very long hike, you might find we can run longer than they can. For short periods, they're quite fast and can cover quite a bit of territory. And next, when they work in any small number of groups, they're good at flushing animals. And so and so aside from being a defensive extension, there's through sensory expansion and assistance in hunting, they're also extremely gregarious animals. And so once they've got a trust bond with you, they tend to hold to it. They're just like dogs are to wolves, right? Humans are to gorillas or chimpanzees, meaning that you can see the neotenic evolution of dogs over time to the point where you get golden retrievers, which is basically a human um, on one end, but you still have like chow chows and some other dogs that are very close, still have more wolf-like instincts in them. And so you get this huge spectrum. The 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 consequence of our gradual domestication of dogs was learning about the process of domestication so that we could domesticate other things. And so the major influence, I would say, is in phases. At first, it's extension of our sense perception. The second is that it taught us how to domesticate so that then we could apply that domestication to other animals. And third, they do still maintain a defensive perimeter around us so that we can worry about silly human things while they maintain a sensory system of the area around us. So I would say those are the primary issues that we deal with, in other words, that have affected us. But it's sort of like the difference between understanding and qualia. I love dogs, right? I mean, I wish I could have another one right now. And I think that a lot of us understand the emotional bond that we can make with these animals, and that how durable that bond can be, and how good it is for our psychological health to have those kind of bonds. So there's multiple dimensions to this, the evolutionary utility of it, and the importance of that evolutionary utility combined with, but the flip side is it's also sort of like emotionally, spiritually fulfilling to have things that you can count on to do the equivalent of love you, all right, or care about you. And so I think it's that I would tend to emphasize the first, but we should recognize the second as being important. All righty. Is that enough? I'm waiting for somebody to say something.
I have nothing to add.
I was going to ask whether Martin had anything to add. It's the dog thing is interesting. There are dog people, there are cat persons. I guess I've just always been more of a cat person since where I grew up. Well, can you imagine this? Like where I grew up, they actually, especially when I was a kid, they actually outlawed dogs within cities in fear of, I guess, rabies or whatever. And so the first dog that I ever seen was a guard dog for what do you call the places where they pile up a bunch of lumber?
Yes, stockyard, or it's gonna be
Yeah,
lumberyard.
yeah, something like that. It was the first time I saw dogs.
Interesting. Well, mine used to come and I'd go to bed as a little kid, and my dog would jump up and go to sleep with me. Once I was asleep, she would go down and get on the floor because she didn't want me rolling around and disturbing her, right? But she would go down, and they're always there for entertainment, affection, whatever. It's a good feeling if you're into it. I like cats as well. The problem is I'm more allergic to them than I am to dogs. All right, so let's go to the next one.
All right. Question 2. How the Jews preserve their identity and antisocial behavior even when they mix with the Europeans? Ooh, we're going to have fun with that one.
They didn't mix with them consistently. The original population of Jewish men, actually North African converts, mixed with Italian and Iberian women to produce Ashkenazim and Sephardim, respectively. But after that initial ethnogenesis kept to themselves, their group strategy selects for female cognition and rewards externally parasitic behavior, and so long as it's preserved, the population can change on genetic and phenotypic level in all sorts of ways without these traits and expressions being significantly affected.
The only thing I would emphasize, that's correct. So you're giving the genetic and macro version of it. I would say that, they've built a culture of excluding others and only including themselves. It's got a superiority aspect to it. And they focused heavily on education and heavily on socialization. And so, in groups. So there's an awful lot of treatment of the group as an extended family, which is necessary to maintain its coherence. I think what's understated is the challenge of producers like farmers versus urban traders like they are and money changers, is that you have a higher moral burden as a farmer, and you have a higher demand for productivity and conformity, whereas people who work largely with money, financing, or trade, they're less dependent upon the network of people. This is sort of an extension of that book Debt that, and I'm trying to promote this because Rudyard is promoting it, is that the introduction of money broke a lot of social bonds, right? Before that was a debt credit society. The possession of money allowed you to store these debts and credits and things like that and account for them in an abstract, impersonal fashion, which is one of the reasons for the great change, the great evolution of religions in the period we call the Axial Age. We should look at the same thing here as a parallel to it in the Jewish society, is that they're able to create an impersonal separatist order by using money instead of by using, for example, in the English world, which I know the most about, where, if you would own 2 oxen and the plow, and I would own something else, and they would own some, they'd have 6 kids, and we'd all work each other's farms a little bit because there's always some debt to be paid in flour or wheat or something. But we did things quite, it's not collectively, but we basically did a very heavily induced barter type of system, which we tried to generally keep everybody about the same. Excuse me. Everybody had to end up being about the same because of it. Because the marginal in farmland, your marginal productivity is relatively low. So when we get off into the Jewish culture, they use this isolation capacity of money and trading to escape the need for interdependence upon others and inclusion. And so that helped them isolate themselves into quarters. It also, however, allowed them to morally diverge from the others, which we know a lot about. I won't get into that. So there's not only a tribal and genetic aspect of it, there's not only an economic interest difference, but there's an independence difference that has amplified the separatism over time. And I won't repeat that we can blame this on the Egyptians for training the Jews as outsiders, as their tax people, etc. Or we can blame Europeans for doing it the same as well. Is that you want to hire an outcast to collect taxes first because the people who are members of the high internal trust society of producers, they don't want that job. That just means everybody's going to hate them. But if you're already part of a group that finds value in the generation of hatred because it reinforces your capacity to maintain group integrity, then that's fantastic. So hence why the Jews specialize in all the things that promote immorality, like prostitution, gambling, loan sharking, money lending, which are different things, selling alcohol on credit, and slavery and all. So they specialize in all the things that didn't require local in-group membership in order to survive. And frankly, all those immoral things are terribly profitable. So that would be my addition to Martin's statement. Who else does this? The gypsies do it. The difference is the gypsies specialize in petty crime, prostitution, and fortune telling, right? Well, but they also do things like fix roofs and and harvest fields and things like that. So
I've never in my life seen a gypsy do that.
I'm just going back in history. I've never seen in my life a person manually grind corn either, but I'm sure it happened a lot in the past. So, but
As
yes,
in using millstones?
yes, exactly.
Well, I've actually done that as a kid.
Yes. Well, I can't think of how to spin that. How can I spin that? It's usually a job for girls. Is that how I spin it? Is that you give me shit for? I couldn't think of. That's the best I can do.
Or a
Sorry.
5-year-old boy.
So anyway, the Jews do it. The gypsies do it. The Muslims do the same thing, but they do it by coming into a territory and applying pressure on locals to not sell this or sell that or whatever. And they use religion more as a special pleading, and there's an excuse to conduct their antisocial behavior. Whereas the Jews are more economic in their stretch, and the gypsies are more petty criminal in their strategy. The technique of antisociality as a means of allowing an outgroup to invade and take advantage of an in-group. It's just another strategic tactic humans have. So if I could take a side bet, I want to bring something up because this Jewish question is coming up again. In that, I feel Rudyard criticizes me a bit because he puts me in the same camp as McDonald, right? Just Doolittle, McDonald are the guys that did the work on this. Yeah, I think,
fine.
huh?
And that's okay.
Well, it's okay, except that my actual work it's a feminine behavior. We've had the coincidence, we've added women to the pool. We've added Eastern European Jews to the pool. We've broken down, allowed them to break down the family. And we've put women in charge of disposal of the majority of income, and they're the primary generators of debt. So the whole fucking economic and then they're on the political system, just as they don't vary as much as men do, they don't vote as variously as men do. And when they vote, unless they have quite a few children, they vote the opposite of men, which is they vote for irresponsibility extension. In other words, they want to, while men vote for maintaining individual responsibility and prohibiting others from parasitism, women vote for parasitism, particularly parasitism upon the production of men. So the point I want to get across here is the Jews have been using the feminine strategy, and we have brought in intellectual leadership that's brought this about and sold this to a feminine strategy. But it's not like we didn't have our progressives doing it too, right? It's not like we didn't have our own feminists. The difference was our feminists and progressives were not anti-Western, anti-male. They were just more of an equality-seeking thing instead of a harming thing, where the Jews are harm-seeking movement. So I want to emphasize how to fix the problem of the enablement of the cognitively feminine, right, made possible by our failure to preserve the incremental suppression of female antisocial behavior that was made possible by the industrial, technological, and media revolutions. And so I know that our people want to blame the Jews, but the problem is it's fucking women.
No, women have been useful idiots in this.
Exactly, right? So
don't blame useful idiots.
Should we then lay the blame on unhindered feminine cognition?
Exactly.
Unrestricted feminine cognition.
How can you blame cognition?
Okay, wait. Martin's
you
right.
blame the criminal.
Martin's right, but you're not. Let me get the statement out before you object to the one, because you're objecting to something I'm not saying. All right. So I agree that I shouldn't have framed it. But what I mean is, democratically and whatever, it's the women who possess the numbers, even if it's the Jews who supplied the ideas. Does that make sense if I frame it that way? And that without the women, the Jews would have no foothold. So yes, the women are useful idiots, but who's eventually to blame? We're the ones to blame. Men are, because we let this shit happen. So the question I always end up with is, why do we let this shit happen? I mean, what is it about our men that put women on a pedestal that's probably undeserved? That pedestal is a product of two eras. The first was the troubadour era after the Black Plague. In other words, the second was the attempt to civilize the knights, basically, who were basically thugs, more like the people who work for gangsters. Civilize the knights with. And the third was the Victorian attempt to create this pedestal of women because of the decadence of the previous range. And so we have this long history of not only this Christian nonsense that drives me nuts. And Christians will argue that they're naturally paternal, and I'm like, well, that would be great if you actually did something. We have this long history of these traditions that lead up to, well, even including the fact that, because of how we conduct war, in other words, we're a militia-based military people, and instead of a standing military-based people like the Middle East, what would happen is that we would leave our women behind to run households. So they had to be competent. They were competent. They had a say in things, right? Especially in running the farm. So we have all these things building up to, we treat our women, it's like white people are the least racist and the least sexist, except that we're accused of being sexist and racist all the time. So I look at this and I say, well, why do we put up with this nonsense? What is it about us that lets us go instead of saying, that's enough, we've had it, we got to do something? And so when we look at the blame, I get a little frustrated when it's just the Jews, the Jews, the Jews, the Jews. I'm only interested in the Jews because I can look at how they've weaponized the female method over time and through the Jewish, the Abrahamic, and the Marxist sequence to provide leadership that takes advantage of women to spread Christianity, women to spread this new version of leftism. I see this destruction of civilization because they're excellent at producing nonsense that sells to women. Okay, and then the problem is once it sells to women, there's always a cadre of men who want to benefit from selling nonsense to women and the structure that puts in place. So I look at it as there's this Jewish problem, there's the feminine problem, there's the Jewish problem, there's the institutional problem we've set up for ourselves because of our history. And then lastly, there's us who's failed to do it. And I feel like when we blame Jews, we're getting away from solving the freaking problem, which is taking responsibility for the fact that, look, women are not capable of this shit. And I can't believe raised in my generation that I'm saying this, right? I'm part of the generation that was, all optimistic about feminism.
Well, I don't see contradiction between all these. We can do all three.
You could do all three, but they don't do all three. If we could get the people who complain about the Jews all the time to complain about all three, then we'd have an argument. But it's really, if you claim just the Jews, it's really easy to be dismissed. Whereas if you blame the sequence of them, it's impossible to dismiss it.
I think that's where the institutes will come in from educating and educating people in the truth.
Exactly. I mean, and it's not like we want to. Excuse me. Martin answers this later in these questions, but I just want to create the laws that suppresses this ability to do this kind of antisocial, anti-political, anti-economic, anti-civilizational behavior. And I want to do it for the good of mankind, but I also want to do it for men who are quite frustrated at this point and might start using rope and pointy objects if this doesn't stop.
My personal favorite is objects that go really fast.
Objects that go very fast. Okay, ropes, pointy bits, and things that go and objects that go very fast.
Only because nobody has invented, like no white guy has invented the phaser yet.
All right. So Martin, did you get my point there? That if we talk about the set of them, it's hard to defeat it. Whereas when you keep blaming on the Jews, it really is self-defeating.
I don't say that's self-defeating, but of course the point of knowing anything or spreading any information is to then decide what do we do about it.
Good. Okay, we're on the same page then.
Am I correct in summarizing Martin's point that Jewishness is not so much about a phenotype or not so much genetics, but rather a mimetic group?
Well, it is about the genetics too, but because of the strategy, incompatible genetics.
So
if you got Jews with very masculine brains, they'd be discarded. they disassociate from them because they wouldn't be tolerated.
Okay, let me ask this question. This is a great one.
Spinoza is a good example, actually.
Okay, I would say that to answer Francis' question, but I want to ask Martin a question. So, Francis, Francis, I would say it's actually both. But when you say genetic, does that just mean female, right, or feminine?
No,
No,
I mean, I guess
it's not.
formula.
It is there is a genetic disposition in their population, right? So there is a heavy bias toward the feminine. That's why they're so good at verbal, but it doesn't play out in the spatial temporal, right? So they play out just like the group's productivity plays out like female productivity. So
Yeah, the feminine cognition is a prerequisite for the strategy,
yes,
but it's not sufficient.
right. Okay, so I think it's both. The answer is it's both. The difference is that shouldn't matter. Humans vary anyway. If we put the law in place to prevent it, then that behavior will become suppressed like it was in the past.
What the reason I'm going there is I think of it as when people talk about Jews, I perceive them thinking about a particular racial group. But as we've seen in Martin's presentation, that racial group, at least from a genetic makeup sense, has evolved over the millennia. But the overall strategy perpetuated by this hardware known as this genetic group has persisted.
Well, they're still selecting for the group strategy.
Right. So it's really a self-reinforcing mechanism of sorts.
Self-reinforcing
Right.
mechanism.
You have the hardware in that it's a selecting. You have the group strategy, which is selecting for a particular set of genetic traits, and this genetic trait then furthers the evolutionary strategy.
Right.
So from that perspective, it's not so much of a race, but gosh, I'm at a loss for words.
Ryan Falk talked about exactly this in one stream and called Judaism a corporation.
Is it a corporation or is it? I guess for lack of better words, it's an evolutionary strategy.
Yes.
Just like there are Chinese evolutionary strategies, Western evolutionary strategies, and so on. This just happens to be an extreme form of feminine evolutionary strategy on par in terms of destructive power as the Western masculine physical evolutionary strategy.
Correct.
Well, it's analogous to think who's most dangerous man, the one with a gun, who's most dangerous woman, the one with a man with a gun.
So I think tying back to Curt's point in terms of solution, I personally, okay, so when something goes wrong, right, when reciprocity is violated, everyone obviously innate into human nature, we want to find out who's to blame. But if the who's to blame is actually evolutionary strategy, then I think it matters not so much as to who to blame and therefore punish the perpetrators, but rather how do we fix the problem? I mean, it's like Curt said, that if we trace the problem to its root, it actually lies in the, call it blind spots or call it myths or whatever, of the masculine evolutionary strategy not taking account and using law limiting the feminine evolutionary strategy, causing an imbalance. So
Correct.
Are we then to blame all the forefathers who made it happen? Like we can't exactly.
That's always the hard question of history is like, well, I mean, people, what are they going to blame us for?
We can't, but also we can't exact recompense from people that are already dead.
That's right.
We can only fix the problem.
Right? If it's like that's that's why I have a problem with all this uh, prosecution of the Nazis and one war. Look, once X number of years have passed, it's done. Right? There's
If
you
you
have a question?
have
Go
our
ahead.
feminine minds, it's never done.
Of course. You didn't have to remind me of that, Brad Martin. That went. My mind went a whole lot of places with that one, and none of them were good. Um, all right, so I had one last thing I wanted to get to you, Francis, and I've lost it. All right, let's go on to the next one because it's sort of a
Yeah, it's
continuation.
related. All right, so question 3. Please deliberate what is the position on Israel according to NLI principles. Is it a step in the right direction for Jewish people or just another parasite of the West?
I always have to object to this framing. We agree on the methodology, although even that has evolved in important ways due to our back and forth. But these questions usually involve far more than the method itself and depend on where we get our information and what kind of model of the world we produced based on them. So you're not getting an ally answer, you're getting my, Curt's, and sometimes Francis's answer. Now, to me, it's pretty clear Israel is parasitic via the Israel lobby, the pedophile blackmail, and constantly getting away with stuff that violates the fiction that is international law. On the other hand, common Israelis may be relatively normal people who benefit from this level of isolation and having to work and fight for their own interests like we do. These commonly have no idea about any of this and may even perceive negative influence from America, unaware that such influence comes from their own people with different ideological slants.
Yes, yes,
I've met some of the Israelis in Prague who came with Gabriel.
yeah. I mean, yeah. I don't. It's again throwing out the. It's like who started. Francis said you can't. I don't sort of I could. It just says, well, the culture has this tendency, right? I don't want to fall into the axalt fallacy that women do and throw and blame everybody, right? They don't know. I would say that Martin's always right. Like this is another example of it. I want to emphasize that we work on the science and the negativa largely what you'd recommend, and one of the things that Martin and I are trying to work on is trying to show that I'm advocating for the Anglo naval position on the world. And I think Martin is a better advocate for the Werrell Island strategy. And so you see these differences in our approaches to what is a value judgment on a desired outcome that's different from the description of the science we do. Now, if we look at it and we say we're going to do the science of that we do, and then we're going to say we're going to outlaw all the stuff that's false and irreciprocal, the field of what's open for you to do that's good, well, that's just your choice, right? That's a political choice. If anything that's not bad, right? In other words, false or irreciprocal, is good is good, right? In the sense, or perhaps a waste of resources, but it's not bad, right? It's not harmful or violating natural law. So in this sense, the institute doesn't. Martin has a position. I have a position, right? I mean, I could bring in everybody. We all have slightly different positions. Martin's got a very moral position on this, and he's right. I have a more typically Anglo geostrategic position on it, and that's that nobody wants them. It's the Palestinian problem too. Why can't we solve the Palestinian problem? It's not like there's that many of them. It's that nobody wants them. Right? Egypt doesn't want them. Jordan doesn't want them. Syria doesn't want
Their
them.
Arab brothers don't want them.
They don't want them because they're bad people. It's that simple, right? Why are they bad people? Is it their genetics, their upbringing, their circumstance, whatever? I don't know. I don't need to know that. All I know is that The evidence is no one wants them because they're nothing but trouble. All right. Now, if we look at the Jews, the truth is the world looks at them the same. The difference is that if you have them over in Israel, a couple of benefits come out of it. One is that their need to survive makes them require emphasis on the scientific, economic, and political and scientific, technological, economic, and political competitiveness in a region that's completely fucking devoid of it. And so I see that as okay. Number one, again, I just reiterate that nobody wants them. Uh, they have a reasonable claim to this territory, even if it's just that they conquered it. Um, uh, they do practice a Semitic language and a Semitic culture and a Semitic ethics and morals and traditions and religion. So they do that. And if they're in that territory, given there's only 6 million of them over there, there's like 20 million here and 6 million there or something like that.
Are more Jews here than Israel?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Then I just gave a wrong number. I think it's 12 and 6, but it's something along those lines. I'm surprised I don't know it off that by because I haven't looked at it recently, and I'm probably confusing it with something else. So, and from a strategic position, that's that's the first step is they're bringing it to that part of the world. The next part of it is I view Islam as the problem child of mankind, and so everybody hates Islam. Chinese hate, right? Chinese hate them, Indians hate them, the West hates them, the South. I mean, everybody sees Islam as the world's problem child, as a mental disease. So, and certainly the Chinese are the only one that are honest about it,
Mm-hmm.
which I find refreshing.
Yeah, but there have been dictators who had civilizing effects and contained Islam, and America killed those precisely because of relationship.
I know, but again, you try to. I love you, Martin, and I'm not trying to stop your. I don't want you. I find value in the difference between all of our opinions, as long as they're based on the same science. So you're making a value judgment, and I understand because you make moral judgments, and you look at the past and say this shouldn't have happened. And I don't do that. I'm like, I look at the past and say that was stupid. Let's not do that again, right? Or that was good, and let's do that again. I don't go back and make that. I just say that was stupid, or that was immoral, or that was whatever. But I don't try to morally project revisionist history. So if
that indicates something about the present, because
no, I agree, but it doesn't help me solve the problem, which is that Islam is the laggard. We can talk about the Chinese Communist Party being a problem, but it's hard to talk about the Chinese people being a problem. When we look at the world, it's hard to find people who are problems other than Muslims
and Jews.
And Jews. Okay, yes, sorry. These two groups. So so I look at this as saying, well, look, let's put them back in there. If they're back in the same area, and the competition between Jews and Muslims does cause some sort of modernization out of necessity, even if all it is the kingdoms ally with Israel, like in order to contain the others, right? And all of us, I think we're just waiting out. I think strategically, everybody's waiting out Iran, which is the primary problem child. We might have to have a problem, or we have an emergent problem with Turkey as well. But Iran's the problem child. If we wait this stuff out, it might work. But my view is, geostrategically, the more Jews in Israel, the better.
So I I just looked on the stats. If Google is to be believed, it claims there are 7.5 million Jewish population in the United States and 7.2 million in Israel. So roughly equal.
I
But
think I'm probably doing the there's they call, what's the term for it? You would have to look at this, but I think it's the number of Jews plus the number of people who are non-practicing that are of Jewish lineage, and then you have the people who are now have outbred but are still in have the same psychological disposition, and I think that number is I can go. I mean, I have this all written up somewhere. It's closer to 10 or maybe 12, right? And they say the total population of those with affinity, in other words, some relation to some Jewish group or some Jewish organization or some Jewish company or some Jewish people, is it's more than 20 million. Not a lot more, but it's in the 20 million. So you're not, so while the core number is probably problematic, and certainly the parasitism of the Orthodox is legendary, it's almost unbelievable, both here and in Israel. The rate at which Jews are out marrying is something their community is worried about.
Question: when Jews out marry, do they, for their offspring to be considered Jewish, does the spouse has to become Jewish as well? How does this work?
Well, I mean, there's just levels of it depending which. It's not like it's like Christianity. There are factions, right? And so you would have technically speaking, the mother has to be Jewish, right? For you to be Jewish. Realistically speaking, people convert, right? And that the community accepts them as long as they're, really converting. But there is then there's one more step which I'm forgetting, and then there's Jewish and secular people who are ethnically Jewish but not culturally. And then and so with that spectrum, you get this divided family on one end where nobody's practicing it anymore, they just have some lineage, and you get the other end of the spectrum where they're fundamentalists, right? The real conservative Jews. But I think what our problem is the credentialist Jews, right, that get into our power in positions because we have they're incredibly good at the bureaucratic process. I'm incredibly good at it. I mean, it's Rudyard went off on this video recently, which was like he's going off on the kind of people that get into bureaucracies, and it's like, oh God, that's a selection. I should get rid of them all, right? I mean, it's just a kind of person who's good at that and goes into it. It's not a good thing.
Yeah.
And our universities are producing them, producing them by design, unfortunately. All right, so I didn't mean to distract that much from our conversation, but again, Martin's correct. NLI doesn't have a position. NLI thinkers have different positions. I probably am one of the outliers in this matter. Am I? I don't know.
In a lot of matters, actually.
I told you I love you lately, Martin.
Yes.
I just want to add that I think for the Jewish people to establish the state, which they failed to consistently do throughout history, I think of it as a step in the right direction. The
I agree.
location they chose absolutely sucks.
Yes.
Like, what is this about this? Let's start in the middle of the map so that anybody can just roll over us at any given time. Like, if they had taken the Madagascar deal, essentially an island, they'd be much better off.
One of the Israelis I met here in Prague agreed with this.
Yes, I know what you're talking about. Madagascar is like larger.
I'm going to flip this around. I don't want to be the guys. I have a black friend. I have gay friends. I have Jewish friends. I mean, it's like, the truth is that I have a bunch of Jewish people that are really important to me. Right? They're very special to me. They're close friends, but they're not. They're not culturally Jewish, right? And so I don't really give a shit at what your background is, as long as you fit in, right? And the reason is because I'm an intellectual, and I have particular fondness for other people who are intellectually biased, and I enjoy them. So it's not. It's just we just need to solve the political problem of conflict with people with different group strategies trying to exist in the same polity. It's just not that complicated. All right, so what's the next question?
I mean, I just looked up the facts. Madagascar, at 226,000 square miles versus UK's 93,000 square miles, it's like 2.5 times bigger.
It's huge.
Yeah, people don't think about it, but there's a map that overlays Madagascar to the eastern United States. I mean, it basically covers the original 13 colonies.
Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah. Anyhow.
And it's not exactly a bad piece of real estate either.
Right.
I mean,
It's pretty warm,
awesome.
comparable,
Yeah.
natural resources.
Right, but it's out of. See, part of my view is that they need the conflict in order to maintain group integrity. So this is funny because it's the same thing people Ortega Gasset says of Europeans is they need to be in a conflict in order to maintain group.
That we need to be engaged in some great endeavor or something.
Yes. And so
conflicts.
Right. Because of our individualism, we have to have a purpose to pursue in order to do anything together. Well, the Jews have to have external competitors in order to do it. If you go to Madagascar, who's the fucking competitor?
Well, they could try to pacify the Dark Continent.
Yes. Well, okay.
Well, look, Madagascar does have a population.
Yeah, true.
That would be an issue. Just like Palestinians.
All right, I don't want to eat this whole hour on this subject. So.
All right, let's go.
I of course agree that it's good that there's place for them to go, but unless we actually start sending them there, then we're not benefiting.
Yeah.
All right, let's go to the next question. Is it immoral for a European to migrate from one European polity to another in the current year? Not sure what that means.
As reciprocity is concerned, the question is whether the natives, particularly of the specific place, would accept him if they were fully informed of who they're receiving. Insofar tribal dynamics are concerned, there's on one hand a question of whether one is abandoning some responsibilities behind and avoiding benefiting his genetic kin and instead looking for his own benefits. On the other hand, if he should consider the target polity as his new in-group, whether his presence will benefit them overall more than his absence. All of this is a much smaller problem, if it even is one, when it's Europeans migrating between European polities in small numbers, than mass migrations of completely different races, which is effectively warfare, and nobody responsible for it was concerned about the morality of it.
Correct. I was trying to think of course, you're right on this again. My question was this: is that it turns out that the free movement of labor basically does not mean that the guys who are carpenters will go do construction in another country, so much as the people who can make a lot more money in a more mature economy leave their country to go do that. And so you get the example problem of the first Poles to move that went to the UK, for example, were notorious for their criminalization, but that eventually got reasonably suppressed. And then today, the problem is that the Poles are having a brain drain. It's the same problem for Portugal and Spain. And so the periphery of Europe loses its talent to the core of Europe, the northwestern core. And this isn't necessarily good for Europe as a whole. It's only good for those people and the countries that they go into. Now, one of my arguments is move capital to people, not people to capital. And that's how I would recommend things are done, especially in today's communication issue. I would rather do what we did in the ancient world, is you send a couple of Germans to start a company somewhere, and they do. Because of this attempt, you see the EU model sort of turning into a catastrophe, because the problem of trying to make a United States of Europe is failing for the same reason the United States of America wants to fragment into the United States of Europe, the less United States of Europe, right? And so we're both heading towards this path with the wrong assumptions, when the answer is the only thing they should be sharing is defense, insurance, and trade policy. And you're as you saw with even Germany this week, I can't remember how many countries are reinstating border checks, but it's increasing. Now, my view is that the border checks are being done because of Muslims and Africans, and so this is misdirecting the problem again. But so the in other words, there's a lot of layers of abstraction over the core problem, which is that countries need to retain their talent in order to be able to adapt to changing conditions. And that's not looking good. This experiment has not been looking as good for Europe as we thought it would. Whereas in Europe, it's causing this all sorts of regional issues. In the States, it's already caused these regional issues. In other words, there's complete depopulation of some areas of our country. But the difference is that the Europeans have maintained their families to a large part. Not entirely, but they've maintained some of their family structure. In other words, Europeans are still more provincial in the sense that they don't move as far from their place of birth in general as Americans do, whereas a lot of Americans move from their place of birth. And so we've had a greater breakdown of the family, but our economy has compensated for it. In Europe, their economy can't compensate for it any longer. And so it doesn't look like it's possible for them to be able to maintain this level of openness, so to speak. So if they were to do anything, they should shut off immigration at the bottom, push their demand for youth employment up, and elder employment out, rather than bring in these third world immigrants whose productivity is 60 to 60% or so, or 60 or 70% of the productivity of the Europeans they're trying to replace. It's just not going to work. So I don't think, and you say, is it immoral? I don't think it's an immoral question. I think Martin answered it. I think it's more of a strategic question. Is it good for everybody to be migrating around today? It might have been useful in the 50s or 40s, but today we should be bringing capital to people, not people to capital.
Well, it's a matter of from whose perspective you're looking at it. Looking at particular groups, particular communities where that is a concern, moral concern. Anyway, I do think Europe should have free movement for ethnic Europeans, but only for travel, not for
Correct.
actually moving around.
I agree, Harley. I'd like to see that happen in the States as well. As a person who's lived in a bunch of them.
Mhm.
I felt very much New Englander this week. All right, what's next?
Curt, do we have time for one more? I thought you need to go around, what is it, 11:30-ish?
I don't think so. I think we moved the meeting until next week. Hold on.
Oh, okay. Then we don't have a problem.
We don't have anything at 11 today. Right, we're good. Thanks. No, we're good.
Okay, cool. Then we
You
can
heard
go on.
something about gender bending?
Say again, Martin, what?
You heard something about gender bending?
You know, Brandon touches a lot of people. And I don't know. He's very, you know how he is. He's very direct. He's having a conversation with somebody. I think it's offline. And I can, because I can hear it through the wall, vaguely get that he's saying they don't do it. There's no necessity for it. I mean, right? In other words, he's saying there's no necessity for any of this stuff. They're just power seeking.
All right, next question, number 5. Luttwak, is that how you say it? Luttwak's coup d'etat analysis. What's right, what's wrong? Is it a competent blueprint for the current year? In the current global context, nominate a promising European target of choice, etc., etc., etc.
Martin, anything you want me to go?
I haven't read it.
So I can't remember when he wrote the first edition. But there's been a newer one. It's more recent. I can't remember that date either. But it's how to run a coup d'etat. But it's dependent on being inside the military and political structure. So it's right because people keep doing it, and it still is the basic instruction manual for applying it. It's certainly the script the left operates under, though more subtly and at a large incremental scale. But I don't think for the libertarian conservative, who is largely removed from the participation in those bureaucracies and higher up military, that it's possible. I think instead, our objective is to give the people who are in there, who would like to, like in particular the military, like things to be different, a reason to not do something. In other words, not resist what we would bring about in a revolutionary context. So, is it a competent blueprint for the current year? Yes. Is in the current global context? Yes. Is there a promising European target of choice? I can't think so. I don't think so. I can't think of any. And that's not really, I don't know. Yeah, I would have to go way, there's this thing of when you say is something possible, you sort of say, what's the 50-50 position, right? Where is it? And I can't think of anything that's above the 50-50 chance. In other words, it's way less likely than likely, so it's not worth talking about. I can't think of any. What is my note here? So it's old, but it can still apply since it's the script that left is operating under, and it's operating. Yeah. And the problem is that the conservatives are too optimistic that the process of the game will play out, whereas the left does not play the game. It actually takes advantage of the rules of the game in order to seize power to circumvent the game. That's all I have to say, really.
I realized he wrote I didn't know his name, but after seeing his portrait, I realized I've seen him on X, that he wrote this book in the 1960s when he was in his 20s.
Yes. He's not an idiot, right? I mean, he knows what he's talking about. My point is that can you do that? In other words, is this valuable for the kind of people that are in the audience listening to this? And it's good to read it because you understand what levers of power you have to be in control of. However, I think we would say in a revolutionary scenario, what levers would we need to get control of, right? I don't think we could do it through coup. I mean, a coup is basically a takeover of a government by a faction within the government, usually military. And I just don't think that could happen in our military.
Well, I think the key difference is our military swore an oath to the Constitution, to law, versus, to stark contrast, the Chinese military is sworn to protect the party.
Mm-hmm.
It's very different.
Yes. All right.
All right. Next question, number 6 from Levi. Could you explore the neuroscience behind dreaming during sleep, especially focusing on how dreams might influence cognitive process, memory consolidation, or emotional regulation? Additionally, what evolutionary purpose might dreams serve, if any, in the brain's overall function?
Well, turns out they're important. Anybody ever? And I don't know if there's how many tech nerds are in our world, but you have a database. Database is basically a binary tree, right? I mean, basically, it all depends on whether you're a binary at the record level or at the atom level, the record level, or the page level, which is some set of records, whatever. But once in a while, you have to update the index because things good happens and whatever. So technically, when we update a database, we update the index when we update the database, right? That's what it actually means. But there isn't just one index in a database. There might be 5 of them, right? All right. So the brain has a similar problem. The difference is it has to do it over time, because where the computer just does a transaction changes, it has to basically beat a drum on a network. So the echo gets persistent. Does that make sense?
An echo gets the brain or the computer does?
The brain has to, unlike the computer, which can just say, okay, here's a pointer to this chunk of memory, right? I'm going to take that memory, move it over here into a log, and I'm going to put this copy of that memory back here with the updates, and that's great. Or I'm going to allocate this new memory for this page of data, this record or whatever it is. I'm going to move the pointer to move that,
Mm-hmm.
and move the pointers from the old piece into the
Sure.
log. Right?
Well, the brain obviously can't do that simultaneously. It has to build actually move atoms versus moving bits.
Correct. And so it does that through repetition.
But what's the beating of the drum? Are you
Okay,
talking about some kind of eventual?
because that's just repetition, right?
Oh, sure.
So, all right. So all I'm trying to do is lay out that problem at the highest level so we can get this. This is actually a fascinating topic. I hope I don't burn the whole rest of our conversation with it. I'll try not to. All right. So there are. What do we start with? Let's start with what memory has to do, and then we'll go up to the next level. All right. All righty. So you asked during sleep and dreaming, right? That was the question. Where is that question? I lost the question.
It's right in front of you. Number 6.
Dreaming during sleep. Okay. So you're interested in the dream part of it, not just the memory part, just not the function of it. Okay. So I'm going to give you the 4 basic processes that happen during sleep, and then I'm going to tell you what dreaming consists of. All right. So the first one is you have to consolidate memories. What does that really mean? That's a really nice term, consolidate memories. Like what physically is happening though is that you just when you create an episode, right? Because that's where a lot of neurogenesis happens up in your hippocampal region, cortex, that area. That you generate a lot of new uh, um, patterns up there, neurogenesis up there, and you create a pattern that is an index to the network of associations of memories that produce the episode. Does that make sense? Your episode consists of a bunch of sense perception, consists of objects and backgrounds and pathways and emotions and colors and all this other crap, right? So there's basic. So when you see, when you have a memory of a past event, it's usually not a video that you can watch, right? It's like it's like a little more than a picture. Like it might be a half a second
Mm-hmm.
or a second in time, right? A very small amount of time that you can revisit, and so that's an episode, right? So an episode is created when all those different senses get all processed through your neurons, turned into all sorts of fragments and eventually into objects and that kind of nonsense, and then into scenes, and then it's all coordinated with the hippocampal regions to physical orientation, like this thing is related to there, and there. And so it creates a spatial model of this disparate set of things that we've perceived through our different senses. And this, go ahead.
Question. So that episode, how's it physically formed?
It's physically formed, like I said. If you were to look at a section of the hippocampal region,
Mm-hmm.
right, and this little section, it would show like a bunch of dots. That dot matrix is a unique pattern. That unique pattern feeds back. That unique pattern is the reflection of the underlying networks in this huge chain that produced the episode. all the sense perception. So think of it as what's the global unique identifier? GUI.
Yeah.
So
I see.
all right, and so this GUI is in there and it's formed, and that's what creates an episode. Now, there's valence, like importance attached to episodes, right? Most of them are not. Some of them, especially ones that make us experience novelty, like, oh, I get it, or or those things that we use to repeatedly recall something that just happened, right? Those those are things that have to be reinforced by, in other words, though, either valence, like excitement or intention or novelty or emotion or fear, right? Or or repeated use right away. Those things are things that get remembered, and I'll get to memory, uh, selective forgetting in a minute. But the things that get remembered are the things that have some sort of weight attached to them.
Mm.
All right. And so when you're dreaming, when you're in REM sleep, you start consolidating um, these emotional and procedural memories like skills, habits, that kind of stuff, because they're being replayed over and over again. Dreaming has to come. I hope I don't lose my point, but dreaming will make sense when I get through this, right? So the second part is, so we have basically an indexing function that says, okay, this stuff is related and important. Then we have uh, reorganization. So uh, uh, so that's when we use auto association, right? Because that's what the brain does. That's basically, that's what we think of as intuition and everything else. The auto association of that memory with other things, the other things that are related to it. So a creative idea might come out of it, right? A novel comparison might come out of it. Then there's the subsequent emotional processing. Again, this happens during REM sleep. Usually, the emotional stuff is pretty vivid. Um, and this usually involves, I think, the amygdala, the amygdala, uh, which uh, which both which regulates the emotional valence of that episode. So this is where your emotions are usually moderated. Um, Experiences are refelt, so the experiences reinforce, right? Can reinforce the existing memory, right? And but it could also do the opposite, which is let you detach from an emotional memory.
The amygdala.
Well, I mean, the amygdala is where it's active because that's where a lot of emotions are
Mm.
processed, right? But what I'm saying is the input from that into this network, which is started by the index, right? I mean, it's index network. Because remember, it's just all this stuff all over your brain, right?
Well,
And the
yeah.
index is just accessing the stuff that's stored all over your brain. And the amygdala is the emotional center. And so what it's trying to do is moderate your emotions. Is this valuable so I should remember it? Is this traumatic so I should forget it? Is this irrelevant so I should forget it? Or forget it. I should downregulate it. Or is this irrelevant and I should forget it? And then we have the problem of selective forgetting, which is next. And this basically weakens or eliminates neural connections related to information that doesn't have a valence association with it, right? So you might be in your auto associating while you're sleeping, and this would find some association that's novel, right, and interesting and valuable and emotionally rewarding. And you would say, okay, I'm going to emphasize that. But you're going to say, okay, you're also going to come up with associations that you're going to downregulate. You're not going to emphasize those
Mm-hmm.
things. And you can see this is a hierarchy I'm walking through. And then there's procedural memory. And you'll notice that, I've said this a lot, which is that envisioning it is very close to doing it. Why? Because your physical actions are, when you imagine doing something, your physical actions to do it are calculated in parallel with the imagining. So this is the miracle of what's going on. This is a hyper exaggeration, but the lower levels of your neocortex, right, 6 layers, they're mostly concerned of where is this in relation to the body and what's going on right now and going on in that movement. And then the upper half is like, what's it related to? And the top part is really what's it related to nearby, right? Like in 2 steps over. So when you are when you're in non-REM sleep, this is when, in other words, when you're REM sleep, there's heavy suppression of some things, right? Where you're in non-REM sleep, and you're consolidating these procedural memories by essentially repeating the motor skills in an environment where you are actually, your motor activity is suppressed. Although I got to tell you that I'm always frustrated that it feels like I should be running faster when I'm running in my dreams. All right, so we went through them again. It was consolidation, reorganization, processing, emotional processing, selective forgetting, and integration of procedural memory. And that's a sort of hierarchy, right? So those are all the things that have to happen when you're dreaming or when you're sleeping, right? Because your brain is busy the rest of the time doing like real world stuff. So one of the reasons sleep is necessary is not only cleaning out all the toxins and waste products from your brain from the hard work of thinking, sort of like how your muscles have to be cleaned out
Mm-hmm.
of after you've had a workout. The the sleep process allows this to happen. Now, it's interesting, and it allows this repetition cycle to go. So literally what happens, it's like a car's carburetor. There's a bunch of waves, right? I'm going to get to this in a bit, but a bunch of waves, and the state of your brain wave determines the degree of sleep and which of these things is sort of being done, right? So, and again, it's a hierarchy. Now, the thing to remember is your brain is always doing the same thing, no matter you're waking, or sleeping. All right. It's always processing this information. It doesn't go to sleep. It just turns off your awareness and your consciousness, right? Or it down regulates them so much that that it can do all this crap to you without having you spaz out and do stuff like when
Mm-hmm.
I'm extremely stressed, I've done something like get up and punch the wall, right, when I'm sleeping, right? Headboard, actually. I've been in my dreams, I've been in, like, I have this dent in my head up here somewhere from being in a fight in a dream and actually leaping out of the bed to hit someone and hitting my head on a table. So your brain is what's happening when you're sleeping is suppressing the output side of your
Mm-hmm.
nervous system while maintaining the input. And so, depending on what stage of sleep you're in, you need to experience more or less of whatever it is because your brain's going to experience it anyway, right? It's just not going to get through to your conscious experience. Or in other words, it's not going to get through to the part of the memory which can review this. And so when you're dreaming, you're doing what you would normally do, except it's instead of daydreaming, you're just night sleep dreaming, and you're doing that largely uh, by the by shutting off a lot of sensor external sensory, and therefore allowing the brain to work only on what it's got in its present sensory system.
Mm.
Right. So we really do go to sleep at night and process the past 24 prep process the past 12 hours, and wake up and get 12 more hours, and then process the next 12. And we do something along whatever it is, 16 and 8 hours, whatever. We really do that. All right. So have so if I want to make sure I answer this. So I've created the picture. If I got to where I've answered the question. Um, where are you?
Well, especially focus on how dreams might influence cognitive processes, memory consolidation, or emotional regulation. I think we touched the memory consolidation and emotional regulation. I don't know about cognitive processes.
Well, in cognitive processes, it does create associations, right? Create associations like, um, I don't know how many of you have had ideas while you're sleeping. I certainly have. I have most of them in the shower doing, that's what most people do, shower, driving, when they're in a relaxed state of doing some minor stimulation, and then the auto associations happen. Um, but generally the same process is happening when you're sleeping,
Mhm.
and you might get new eyes. So really, you can't. It's a weird thing of you can't say that. I mean, since anything you cognitively work with is a product of stimulation activating memories, right? Then, and your memories are essentially what your cognition is built out of. It's like saying, how does it affect your cognition? It's your memories affect your cognition, right?
Your memory is your cognition
Right,
in
your
a way.
memory is it, right? And so when you say that, it's like, well, you're separating these things as if they're separate. They're not. You're literally going up into this little piece over here to get that piece of a memory, right?
Mhm.
So when you play this all out, there's no how does he say it here? I got to ask. Um, so how it affects your cognition is it makes memory available now at a low cost, that's consolidated. It's integrated. The physical training has been taking place. The emotional training has been taking place. The associative training has been taking place, and you've put this piece, the physical motion, emotional valence, associative content in the episode. You've consolidated all those things so that they're available at low cost to your cognition. Why? Because they've been stored in memory, and their valences have been stored with it as intensity or importance. So your dreams are no different from your thinking, except it's random, disorganized stimuli from the stuff that happened in the day. And you'd be surprised how much your emotions, if you don't think of this always, how much your emotions, because your emotions usually take a while to dissipate while you're sleeping. And if you're in a long period of stress, that stress maintains. And so whatever you're carrying around with you gets both in more abstract state, like your emotional state, your not so much what am I thinking about, but how do I feel and how have I felt for a while. That stuff is an input to the audio
Mhm.
associations and the consolidations that are happening when you're sleeping. Dreaming has to happen a little bit, because you want access to valence, right? You want access to some valence. Do you need to remember too much of your dreams? Doesn't seem to be. We need to remember them. You can be quite good at lucid dreaming. I was good at it in my 20s. You you can be quite good at lucid dreaming if you practice it, although it requires a good sleep space, and quite a bit of practice. So you can sort of lucidly dream and remember them, and maybe put some effort into them. But basically, that's a skill you can learn like any
Uh,
other.
Question: by lucid dreaming, you don't only mean vivid dreams, but also have agency to direct the outcome of the dreams.
Yeah, you can't like reason, but you can. It's like having an emotional intuition that can influence the direction.
Mhm.
I don't want to do that. I want to do this
Yeah.
instead. Right.
Usually when that happens, I wake up because I realize it's a dream.
Well, exactly. That's the problem. Is the minute you start engaging anything that can regulate that process, that's becoming awake. That's becoming alert. Excuse me. I always hate this. Awake versus what's the A word?
Aware.
Aware.
Mhm.
Aware. Thank you. Aware, awake, conscious. Right. I mean that sequence. So technically, you're slightly aware in your dream, right? Your dream world, and then you're more aware as you wake up, and then you're awake. You're more aware, and then your consciousness is just the level of awareness where we have invoked our agency, right? So that level of detail. It's not like this is like extremely well studied material, right? We know a lot about this. Um, I'll just take a quick. I'll try to take a quick and see what else I can say here, because there is a. So what do I want to cover here? I just got my notes. All right. So we talked about encoding, which is the indexing, consolidation, retrieval, reactivation, which is yes, whatever, forgetting, selective forgetting. Can I try to forget some? I would like to selectively and forget things intentionally. That doesn't seem to work. So basically, sort of like a carburetor, there's gamma waves, beta waves, alpha waves, theta waves, delta waves, sharp wave ripples, and stuff. And basically, these determine what you're gonna what the and what of this process is going to happen. It's going to determine your wakefulness, your non-REM sleep, and your REM sleep. And so, like your wakefulness, you're going to emphasis on encoding and retrieval and active thinking. And your non-REM sleep, it's going to emphasis on consolidation, right? And that's mostly delta waves. And in your REM sleep, it's going to be emotional memory consolidation, reorganization, selective forgetting, and that's going to be driven by theta waves. So it's literally like a fucking carburetor. Right? Fire this, fire that, fire that. It's just going around like this, and you're just dealing with different issues. And I think the interesting part for me was learning how neurogenesis in this first part of the brain has to persist, because you sort of never run out of the necessity for forming new indices for episodes.
When the
Right.
brain forms indices for episodes, and when you talk about it's almost like a stack ranking function of some sorts, is it physically like, so for example, if an episode memory has to go travel through all these neurons or axons and so on to promote to promote that memory, does it just form does it form a shortcut or tie multiple of them together?
Well, all right. So I see what you're thinking, and I should have probably said
I'm
this
thinking
because
like physically, how does that axon and neuron?
physically, it's just wires,
Right.
right? It's very fucking complicated wires, but it's just wires. But I would say that we tend to think about, because we have so much computer knowledge. In other words, that's our model of the world right now is computers. We tend to think about neurons like memory bits. That's not really true.
No, the way I think of it is, so we use too much of a computer analogy based on current technology, which is you have
That's right.
CPU, you have RAM, and you have hard
Yeah.
disks and so on. It actually doesn't work that way. It's more like a three-dimensional CPU with RAM built in, but except the pathways themselves are the memory
Correct.
as well as a
Exactly.
processing mechanism.
And so the way I say it is, the higher so think of it this term. What's his name doesn't like it anymore, but I'm going to still use it because it's so educational. Hierarchical recursive memory, HRC, hierarchical recursive memory. So if what happens is you've got a memory of a bit here. You've got a memory of a bit there and a bit there, like the edge of this bottle, right?
Mhm.
right? If I touch that, if I wasn't looking at it, right, I was just touching it. If I just touch it, that's different from if I touch a lot of it with the tip of my finger or just that, right? I can't learn much from that, but all of a sudden I can feel the curve. Then if I do this, I feel more.
Mm-hmm.
So what's happening is, you're detecting that there's pressure on a set of nerves here, and their coincidence is what's determining the curvature. So it's a hierarchy. That's what's remembered, is that coincidence. In other words, the relative position of these things,
Mm-hmm.
right, by the neurons, by the group of neurons. So you got to think of it as this thing in your mind is built out of this huge hierarchy of components, right? We call fragments, right?
Mm-hmm.
And most of the thing is you start out with edges and then you get surfaces, right? That's really it. But literally, it's all. If you were to look at it physically, as cutting away like the neurons one direction or the other, right? The neural column, right, which is where all the computing goes.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, a neural column, a microcolumn, is basically a CPU, right?
A single neural column. It's the collection of neurons.
It's a collection of around 80 neurons on average, right? And it's got 6 layers, and they have sort of various functions. Right? So that's a CPU, and there's a shitload of those neural columns, right? Right. And so, but they can figure out, that neural column will figure out, because it's talking to, right? It's got connections with the neurons next to it. That neuron can figure out that looks like this bit, right? This curve,
Mm-hmm.
right? That feels like an edge of a bottle. Now, some people think that the macro column, which is a collection of those columns, actually can identify an object, right? That's how good they are. Some people think we can do more. We can get very close to it with just a single microcolumn. I don't know. There's enough information storage to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that the way we should think about neurons in this hierarchy is everything is a memory of the thing underneath it.
Of the thing underneath.
In other words, the memory of this bottle consists of the combined memory.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's memories of memories. So what do we actually have to get to, in other words, how far down that thing do we have to reach to get to that's a bottle, and that bottle associates with all other bottles laterally rather than going down the train. In other words, the generalization.
Well, it just needs to have sufficient layer. It just needs to. Well, I think of more in going up, right? Because at the base layer, you have these individual bits of identification, and then once you get traverse further up this tree, you form a guesstimate. Well, actually, I think that's a round object. Then it gets to, well, I think this is actually more like a bottle. And then eventually, higher up, you realize, well, this is a Coca-Cola bottle versus a Pepsi bottle, and so on.
Exactly. So, making it that simple right? It's more distributed than that, but that gets the idea across. So, do you actually have to go all the way down to get it? Probably not.
Depends on level of precision.
Right. Exactly. So that's why you do things like your eyes. The middle of the very center of your eye is very dense, but the edges of your eyes are not.
Correct.
The center of your eye is also very color sensitive, and the edges of your eyes are black and white. That's why if you don't look directly at something at night, you can actually see it better.
Yeah.
Right. Well, it's the same thing here. Is that if we need the information, we can focus on it, right? Oh, does that really look like that, right? Or feel like that? But in general, when we're trying to rapidly identify things, we get the gist of it, which is incredibly accurate. That's the hard part, is that spatiotemporally, our gist is holy shit accurate. It's amazing, right?
Something that computers or MLs and AI cannot match, not even
No,
remotely.
no,
The
no.
speed and the accuracy.
It's a speed, accuracy, and the depth. Like, I mean, the associated meaning that comes from,
Oh, right.
it's just
Not
crazy.
just object identification, but also like the sensories associated with the meanings
I
and
mean, the weird math of the feelings that are associated with it, you know. So, so the point I wanted to make here is that I think we're getting there. Is something you touched on, you quite touched on nicely earlier. Is that, first of all, it's really what's when you read the book we're about to, the next one we'll publish, not the one we're going to do this week, but the next one, the level of detail we go on into neurons is, and how complicated they are and what they can do. It's fascinating. So it's what they're, the layers and the interactions and the connections. I mean, the vast number of, I mean, the computational capacity of just a couple of neurons is terrifying, right? So, so the real problem is then getting at them. In other words, in real time. The real problem is you need to forget shit because you can't find
because
it
otherwise
anymore.
you have too many connections between different neurons and it becomes a huge search indexing problem.
Correct. It's you can't get at it, which is one of the problems you notice as you get older. You think you're forgetting, you're actually not. You just can't find it, right? If you had the stimuli, you'd remember it, right? But you can't manufacture the stimuli to find it among the other, 25, 35, 45, 65, 75 years of life,
Yes.
of memories you have. So, and anyway, so if we've got that point across, we go back to your original position of memories are, what did you say it? You said
I thought it how would I put it? It's not that our brains is a CPU. It's actually the pathways themselves, the memory themselves.
Correct.
Is the computation.
Is the computation. So you're just re-experiencing a network, right? Every time. And so the memories are what you're doing, right? The memories aren't separate from what you're doing.
Right.
The memories are what you're doing. All right. I think I should learn how to tell that story a little more effectively. But anyway, it's very different when you're writing and you get very precise and can think about it.
The neurological pathways that forms your memory is, like you said, is your cognition. Correct.
It's physical. It's not
Right.
goofy stuff, right? I mean, it's physical. It's not. Once you understand it, I mean, especially if you're a computer science guy, and especially if any knowledge of what we used to call AI. Today's AI is a little different, but of simply neural networks. You sort of get, it's like, okay, what's going on in there isn't so much complicated. There's just lots and lots and lots of it. But realistically, neurons do CRUD operations: create, read, update, delete, right? And they do it by how much they're used. Neurons that get fed, the memories that get fed, stay strong, and memories that don't go away. And that's not even true.
And then the dreaming is mostly the update, reinforcing the connection between neurons.
Yeah, it's realistically it's indexing, right? You're trying to say, I got all this crap in my head today. Let's turn this. What does this mean? How does it relate to the rest of the knowledge I have? Right? How do I integrate all this experience into everything else I know? And it does it without you having to think about it. And part of that is valuable because if you did think about it, it'd be worse than you would achieve by auto-association anyway. In other words, the mechanical process is better at doing it than you would if you intended it. partly because it's just too complicated to think about. All right, so I think I did my job on that one.
Yes. Well, we got about 10 minutes left. I don't know if I have time to answer number 7 here, because this is a rather long one, or maybe the answer is simple. Shall we give it a try?
I'm sure if Martin's answered it, it'll be right. So let's give it a shot.
All right. So question 7. I have the capability to build an OnlyFans agency with numerous AI-powered capabilities, such as AI-generated nudes with a specific female likeness, with her consent, of course, explicit videos with her face cloned on it, chatbots to talk to clients, and even phone calls with her voice cloned to an AI that can have low latency conversations. I'm 19 and confident I can make lots and lots of money. Yes, you're right about that, because I have lots of connections in the space, but I'm deeply conflicted about the morality of it. It will be fully informed, warranted, and voluntary, but it's unproductive, and I don't want to potentially bait others into hazard. Should I do it and donate substantial amount of profits to the Institute, or should I not do it at all? How immoral would it be?
This isn't a real question. Martin, whose question is this?
I have no idea.
Because they didn't put that in now.
It's such bullshit. It's a great question, but it's obviously a bullshit question.
Well, as with all questions of morality, friend-enemy distinction comes first. If you're depriving competing groups of their resources and funneling them to your group specifically to improve it, that is moral. If you're baiting your own, not so much. So the question is, who'd get baited with such content? I suspect it would be males who can't even tell a real woman from an artificially generated one, and observations on the internet suggest that's primarily Indians whose own culture rewards cheating, so fair game. In any case, people that would look for this already look for porn anyway, and the only question is who gets the attention and money. But just so it doesn't look like I'm advocating this for self-serving reasons, the other side, you may want to consider how it will affect your own self-image, whether it won't set a precedent for justifying worse things, and whether you won't be perceived as less trustworthy by your own in-group members aware of what you're doing.
Well, that's the correct answer, of course. The only other thing I would add to it is, yeah, well, you're 19, but how much money do you have? Because I guarantee you, there's guys with lots of money doing this already. I ran into one site the other day that I was surprised. What do you call it when you take a photo of a woman and you put it into this thing and it takes her clothes off? What is that? I don't know what that's called.
I didn't even know such thing existed.
It exists, yeah.
Oh God.
No, and it's like a big deal. And it's actually on some website. I was like, okay, and apparently it works flawlessly. Not flawlessly, but it works exceptionally well. So my view would be, yeah, but you and the 10,000 other guys are going to do this. And, you want to really invest in something like that when it's, the compute power to do it is non-trivial. And in other words, the cost of it is non-trivial, and there's going to be a lot of people with more money doing it. That'd be my only comment.
Well, I mean, certainly it's unproductive.
Well, I mean, Martin already answered that. I mean, right? I mean, as far as I know, it's baiting into hazard.
Yeah, but
Martin,
who's
correct?
being baited?
What?
Again, who's being baited?
Well, but I was about to say, but Martin is correct. It depends on who's being baited. Now, you said something I don't understand. Is that Indian thing true about porn? Is there like a
I don't know about porn, but I think I've seen a lot of screenshots then from social media replying to artificial
what I'm just
demanding attention.
I don't know these things. I can't. I remember being surprised at how much gay porn was coming into Pakistan. I remember that being because porn. I don't know if they do it anymore. Back I haven't looked at this in years, but back in the day, Pornhub would publish statistics And they were awesome, right? They were so insightful. But anyway, I don't know if they do that anymore.
My impression is that Semitic cultures have those very strict rules about sexual behavior because they're exactly the ones who need it most.
Okay.
You know,
All right.
the answer that our conversation on this question so far actually remind me of something in terms of who you're targeting. One of the issues with the internet and a service like this is you really don't have much control as to who gets access to it, right? And an analogy here is almost like there's a reason why we shouldn't regulate guns, but we should regulate explosives. Because for explosives, even if you are the best explosive technician in the world, once that bomb goes off, you can't say, well, that bomb is only going to hurt people I want to hurt and not the innocent bystanders,
Exactly.
because there's a blast radius.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And so you're saying that you get the same thing with this kind of thing is that you don't know who you're hurting.
Right. You don't know who you're actually baiting to hazard. Even the Chinese government, which allegedly engaging in this kind of behavior, the TikTok that serves in the United States versus TikTok that serves in China has different content. Even they cannot prevent the citizens from going into, say, a VPN and look at the TikTok content available in the West.
Mm-hmm.
I guess we certainly want to ban this, but until that happens, that content will be emerging. So the question is who's going to be getting the money.
Yep. All right. What's next? Anything else? We're done?
Yeah, we're done. So in 2 weeks, I think fellas are going to be traveling to the convention. So I guess we'll skip the next instance of this and then pick back up 4 weeks later, sometime in October.
All right. Well, I hope this was useful for the audience. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Francis. Thank you, Martin. And I hope you enjoy it. Martin, what was there? I forgot what my closing duties are on this. We're on YouTube, right? You publish all the details in the how to submit a question.
Oh yeah. So right after this meeting, what I will do is I'll set a schedule for the next one, and then so just look for the upcoming NLI office hours on our YouTube channel. It will have the date, time, as well as in the description a link to ask questions.
Yep. All right. Love you guys. Love the audience. Take care.
Take care.